A number of provincial and municipal governments are calling on Ottawa for support in dealing with an influx of asylum seekers, but some advocates feel as though newcomers to the country are being unfairly blamed for issues like housing and affordability. Kizito Musabimana is the founder and executive director of the Rwandan Canadian Healing Centre and works with newcomers to Canada, and he joins me now. Good morning to you.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Well, thank you for being here, Kizito. Tell me, what was your reaction when you heard again, because this is not the first time, the concerns about the number of non-permanent residents coming into the country?
I think one of the things we are worried about as a community, and for me personally, is the scapegoating and not looking at the actual problem. So we're basically kind of focused on the hanging fruits, and we're kind of missing the forest from the trees. Because when you think about the challenges that we're facing, whether it's affordable housing and inflation, this has nothing to do with whether it's newcomers, asylum seekers, international students, and skilled workers. It's more about the decisions that we've failed to make for the last 30 years when it comes to affordable housing. And of course, in terms of looking at the asylum seekers, it's the investment we've failed to make in the communities, grassroots and non-for-profits and others like ourselves that are supposed to be doing the work that we've been doing for the last 6 to 7 months to deal with this crisis on the asylum seekers. So when it comes to the decisions on the federal and honestly, it's at all levels, including the municipality, to say, okay, let's cap the numbers so we can actually deal with what we have first. I think that is really scapegoating, doing the easy thing, and not really understanding that we need to go through this. We need to face the music, and we actually need to tackle the real problems. Because for me, as our organization is also doing work on affordable housing, when you go on the ground and you talk to developers, you know that they're looking for these people, whether it's international students or skilled workers. We need more people because what used to take a year and a half to do, it's taking them 3 to 4 years to develop because they don't have skilled workers.
Right.
So again, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, Kizito, I can see you're passionate about your work. What the asylum seekers that you're working with now, what is the situation for them right now when they get to Canada in terms of finding a place to live, for instance?
Oh man, we've had, especially since July, what we did is we brought people in, we put them into churches, and we are grateful for the churches that opened their doors. As you know, this has been making news for the last few months. And the challenge is you could find the housing, but sometimes there is no program to support them. So, for example, there is the car program that was available, but it ran out of money. And then the money that we got meant there is a waiting list. So at one point, we had housing for almost 81 people, but we had to wait for programming in order for them to move out. So finding homes is not easy. And the ones that find homes, they have to come together. Like sometimes you have a 3-bedroom house, but you have to get almost 6 to 7 people in it because that's how much you need in order to afford those units. So it's really tough. And at some point, we've just decided, like some of the churches wanted to close those by the end of the year, and they have now continued because people don't have a place to go. You have shelters that are full, warming centers that are full. You have list pits that are also full. So what do? We have to continue to do the work that the federal government is supposed to be doing without investment, without any funding. We're just scrapping and trying to do our best and having people do overtime in volunteering hours.
Yeah, well, to be fair to Ottawa, they have sent a large amount of money to Quebec, although they seem to be considering doing more, and they have sent some to Toronto, although, as you know, the mayor is asking for more. I hear what you're saying about scapegoating immigrants. I wonder then what you think the solution is for the federal government. What should they be doing to help asylum seekers and non-permanent residents?
Wonderful question, and I think that's something everybody should be asking themselves. For example, when you think about the asylum seekers, if we can do more on developing units, right? And we're talking about now, when you talk to developers once again, the cost to develop is higher than what they actually get in return. They are the investment in return. So can we do more on that interest rate? Because that's what the developers are saying. But on the other hand, can we invest in the non-for-profits? For example, the Continental African agencies in Toronto, if all of them actually were defunded, a lot of us are not funded. You have Ethiopian Association. These are groups that have been doing incredible work for years that are not longer funded because whether it's province or the city have made decisions not to fund them. So as a result, our people ended up on the street because traditionally, they would have been supported by those groups. So funding the agencies on the ground where these newcomers can come and actually find support would be one thing. On the other hand, instead of capping and kind of punishing provinces, because maybe provinces and the federal government are not on the same page, what we believe they could do is actually the federal government could partner with these universities and actually do affordable housing development. Similar, we are about to do that, and we're a non-for-profit that have never been in the affordable housing business, but we are looking forward to actually doing that. Why can't they do that? So if a university, I saw a study on your website, if a university is requesting 5,000 students, then require them to house at least three-fourths of that, of those individuals that are coming in, and then do the work together to actually develop the units to house them. I think we have to really do the hard thing and not so focus on doing the easy decisions.
I think that is something the federal government is thinking about too when it comes to universities. But Kizito Musabimana, I know you're thinking a lot about it too. Appreciate you giving us some of your perspective about what you're experiencing and the people you work with. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
We are doing what we can under this financial strain. But do we want to close the doors to refugees? No, because I believe this is a city, a country that are built by newcomers.
Toronto Mayor Olivia Chow there talking about the strain on that city, as we were just talking about with Kizito, but it's happening, as you know, elsewhere in the country too. Plus, there's a cap on international students coming, as the federal government seems to be signaling. Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Tana McCharles is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. She's in Ottawa. Brett Forrester is a reporter with CBC Indigenous. He's also here in Ottawa. And Kelly Kreiderman is an Alberta columnist for the Globe and Mail, and she's in Calgary. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
I'm going to start with you, Tonda. What do you make of sort of, again, the pressure on the federal government to do something on non-permanent residents? It seemed like last week it was international students. This week it was asylum seekers. There's a lot of things pushing on them to take some sort of action.
Right, and at another point, it's temporary foreign workers. I mean, the pressures are enormous because, look, Canada just had a huge population growth last year, and amidst all the other pressures on things like housing and infrastructure and healthcare, the cracks in the system are showing, and they're showing wide. And so, of course, the mayor in Toronto and the premier in Quebec are going to be screaming loudly for some help, both economic and policy-wise. The question is, how does the government break out all those pieces and tackle it? I expect we'll see maybe some answers this week when the Liberal cabinet meets in Montreal.
Yeah, Brett, one of the things that Kizito mentioned there, and it's something actually the Prime Minister mentioned in an interview with Tonda's paper with Susan Delacourt, is sort of the consensus around immigration potentially shifting in this country, and concerns that immigrants, non-permanent residents, are scapegoated for a bigger problem. How dangerous do you think that is in terms of the conversation moving in that direction for a government to manage?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risk of backlash and danger of what your guest described as scapegoating. I think we've seen examples of this in different parts of the world, in Europe, for example, where we've seen in recent years the lack of humanitarian, social, and civil infrastructure to support waves of newcomers, whether they be asylum seekers or not, has resulted in backlash and even been used as kind of almost like red meat for nationalist political movements that run on opposition to immigration. So that's why it's a serious public policy issue that's going to require multi-jurisdictional cooperation and cross-partisan cooperation to address. And as your guest put it, he sees the governments across the board really going for low-hanging fruit rather than putting this significant infrastructure in place to support people.
Kelly, you want to weigh in on that in terms of the discourse around it?
Yeah, this issue is the pickle of 2024, the political pickle, because we have a country that it has had a welcoming outlook to immigration, understands the value of immigrants coming to Canada on moral and selfish economic reasons. There's a value to Canada getting people, but what we have right now is really unprecedented growth, and grappling with that. And a bigger political problem for the federal Liberals is they don't always seem in control of this system. They seem to be, we have a new report in recent days that there is 1 million international students in Canada. That was a surprise to Statistics Canada. We have reports that the government is not monitoring when non-permanent residents leave. It's the concern that they don't have a full handle on the system, whether we're talking about the federal government and to a lesser extent the provinces in terms of the certification of post-secondary institutions. That is, I think, that the thing that is going to weigh on Canadians as they think about housing, as they think about immigration. And, there is that concern that long-standing position that Canadians have that is open to immigration and newcomers, that it starts to shift. And I think you'll start to see even allies of this federal government, you wouldn't necessarily have thought that Olivia Chow would be clashing with the federal government at such a level, but you're going to see maybe BC also expressing concerns about this.
So Tonda, what does a government do in that case? Like, as everyone has said, this is also shared jurisdiction. It is not solely the federal government's responsibility. So what kind of policy options do they have?
Well, I guess it depends on, what we're talking about. Are we talking about the explosive growth in international students? Well, they have certain things they can do. They can start to, and as they're signaling already, they're going to cap the number of international study permits they issue. But it's really then going to be up to the provinces to try and rein in some of these so-called questionable schools that they're issuing permits for. But then if you're talking about sort of another aspect of it, what in Quebec they're talking about asylum seekers, well, what does the government do around that? One of the things they may do is they can start to reinstate some visas on certain countries to try and curtail travel into Canada from countries where a lot of refugee claimants arrive from, i.e. Mexico. Will they do that? Then, we've still got a target overall of nearly 500,000, I guess 500,000 people that this government wants to let into the country next year. They say they're going to freeze that, but these are permanent residents they're prepared to accept into Canada when we've got reports not just from the government itself, but from the Bank of Canada and big bank economists that Canada can't house that number at the rate at which it's already, at the rate at which we're building homes right now in this country. So these are huge policy pressures, and like you said, it's hugely complex as well. And we haven't even talked about the things like skills shortages to build the houses and the cost of building to investors and developers. So massively complex file for the government. I think they're going to pick away at bits and pieces of it. You'll see some of that this week, I expect. But it's not an easy sell. You heard the Prime Minister say there's no silver bullet. Well, great, but that doesn't actually help many people feel comforted that they're doing something about it.
And at the same time, Brett, as Tonda mentioned there was also another report from Desjardins that said if we don't let more immigrants into the country, we will slip into a recession. So we're trying to make up for population growth, and then some areas of the immigration sector start spiking that maybe we don't want them to. But it is a real complicated issue trying to fill in those holes in the labor market while not letting just everybody in, given that we don't have enough services for them.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's a little bit of a tendency as well to just kind of look to the federal government as a parent jurisdiction that can kind of step in and solve all these problems, even though it may not necessarily have all the tools it needs. But as Tonda pointed out in detail, they can modify policy, they can support programs, they can support access to housing, they can fund some of these grassroots humanitarian organizations that really help people. And I think that's probably what we're going to see come out of the cabinet retreat next week as they move on this issue, because as Kelly pointed out, there's some signals that the Liberals are perhaps perceived to be vulnerable and susceptible to political pressure, not just on this file, but other files. They are seen to be acting, perhaps rather reacting in response to some of their partisan concerns, which we've seen, for example, with the carbon tax and home heating oil. So that's perhaps people see an opening to leverage concessions in other areas.
For sure. And I wonder, Kelly, what other levels of government are going to have to do. One of the problems with international students is schools are looking to, not all schools, but some schools, are looking to make up money that they're not getting from the provinces, for instance. So they use international students as sort of an income flow. And I wonder if other levels of government are going to be able to adapt if some of these changes are made.
Absolutely. That's a big problem. You know, we know post-secondary institutions were absolutely hammered by the pandemic, and international fees are a huge source of income. I think we're starting to see the answers. There was a report in the Toronto Star in recent days about limiting the number of international students per provinces, working, it sounds like, with the provinces to allocate that, while the federal government works to have a certification process in place within 2 years. That's going to take a while.
Yeah.
And I think Canada really has to ask itself, are we relying too much on immigration for our economic fortunes? And that question of whether our GDP growth comes from population growth, is that a good thing? When we're talking about growth that many people are questioning, is it sustainable at 400,000 people per 3 months right now? That's the growth we're talking about.
Okay, that was a good conversation. Thank you. You guys can come back.